We are talking about the world having changed and where the money is now, and we're very fortunate to have a panel with a truly global perspective who've lived and worked all over the world and done deals all over the world. You can see, just to introduce from my right, Martin Weiss from Berda, Hiro Tamura from Atomico, and Spencer Lazar from Catalyst. Just to start out, I would love to have you guys just talk a little bit about what it is you do and how you see the world as those two things come together.
Very good. So we're a late-stage investor. So what we do is we invest in companies that have complete teams, complete technology, a ramping revenue line. They don't need to be profitable yet, but typically sort of Series C, Series D. Ticket size is sort of between 10, 25, 30 million. So very much growth capital, so we don't invest into very risky early-stage stuff. It is all about growth, and I guess that's what we're good at as a corporate venture capitalist. We actually think we know how you can operate and grow. Does this work?
Kind of.
There you are.
So I guess we come at it from a little bit of a different angle. My partners and I are very focused on an entrepreneur-centric thought process in venture capital. My partner was the founder of Skype, so that has a big part of our DNA. We feel, and I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise for any of you, but great entrepreneurs have been coming from all over the world for decades, and just because it's tech-driven shouldn't inhibit that. And so our thesis has been driven by that. A lot of what we do everything from Series A to Series C, so we're somewhat stage agnostic, but again, our core geography is Europe. We believe that has great opportunity. I've had the fortune of doing investments for the firm in most every continent, so I guess that's been also very interesting to see.
Hey everyone, I'm Spencer, General Catalyst, partner here in New York. I've had the fortune of doing venture capital on both sides of the Atlantic, so I've been here for the bulk of my career, but also spent 2 years in London where I was doing European and Israeli venture capital, so seen kind of a range of things. At General Catalyst, we do sort of seed through growth with a real focus on Series A, and because of our early stage focus and our close collaboration with entrepreneurs, while we invest in companies that have real global aspirations or may even come from abroad, it's really, really important to us to work with founders, at least one of the members of the founding team in the United States, where we have our offices. So it's a little bit of a wrinkle, but very much a globally focused firm.
Okay, and so 3 different perspectives. Martin, before we came out, you were talking about there are as many unicorns in Indonesia as there are from Germany. So clearly that's a change, and this idea of the rise of the non-Silicon Valley unicorn. Where are we now? Where are we going in terms of that breakdown?
Right. I think the world is changing fairly rapidly. If you look at it, about 20 years ago, 80% of the unicorns were based in Silicon Valley. Today, that number is down to 40%, and the percentage is actually dropping quite quickly. So what we're seeing is a globalization of venture capital, and there are some areas that we think are growing very fast, especially on the later stage. Certainly, Europe is changing here, and there is now a. Sorry, there's something.
Yeah.
Europe is now really increasing really rapidly in terms of later stage financing, and Southeast Asia we think is one of the areas that is going to be truly interesting over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, and can you guys, as someone who's done deals around the world, how hard is it to put that together?
I mean, I think it's difficult, right? Venture capital has traditionally been a very local, there's a very local element to that. So having relationships with those who are in Indonesia or in Germany or Berlin or Munich or Helsinki, London, those are all really important kind of relationships to help you find these great companies, these great entrepreneurs. I think that's definitely a very challenging task that one has to spend a lot of time doing as a full-time job. So I don't think it's getting any easier to do that. Hence, I mean, the interesting part I think about that question is, there's whatever, for the last 15 years, $250 billion plus, companies being formed in tech. That's outside of the Valley, but the Valley. When you say that, it's like it's not even the United States. So, that could be LA, and you would know this better, Spencer. I would think like there's so much going on outside of the Valley, and then extend that into Europe, extend that into Asia. It's there's a lot going on, and so I think that's really promising in terms of what we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, sort of alluded to this earlier, but our belief is that to do early stage venture capital well, you need to work super closely with teams. And to do that, you need to be relatively local. And if you're in the United States, like we are, we might be able to work with a team that's in Austin, Texas, or Chicago, or something like that. But particularly as software has proverbially eaten the world, and it's sort of penetrating industries that are highly regulated and stuff like that, having a real sort of feel for not just cultural sensitivities, but sort of governmental sensitivities and economic sensitivities is super, super important. So. We would not do a Series A deal in their backyard without calling up our friends from Atomico and seeing if they had met the company, if they were close to it, what the reputation of the team was, the quality of the talent that they were attracting, all of that stuff. So, we're working on a deal together right now with the folks over at Berta, and it's really symbiotic.
Okay, and just in terms of the competition in the US, right? There's opportunity everywhere, but the competition seems especially intense from a funding, from an investing perspective in the US. So how does that drive things?
Well, it is much more competitive. I mean, one obvious ramification is valuation. So, we all have to look in the mirror when we wake up every day and, try to keep honest with ourselves and our partners about the prices we're paying for deals. The other is sort of the specialization and sort of stratification of venture firms by stage, by vertical focus, even at this point by sort of demographic focus. You have firms focused on women, firms focused on underrepresented minorities, all that stuff. And particularly as you get to the very early stages of venture, where you're working with teams that are just a few people and are really, really focused in an individual area, if you can match that talent and technology potential with a firm that is as focused as possible in the thing that the team is trying to accomplish, there's real potential to create a lot of value early. So that's sort of what we're seeing on the competitive front.
Question to that, Spencer. A lot of the US funds like Sequoia, like Excel, have decided to have international operations and really be present globally. You have decided to be based out of the US.
That's correct.
Why have you taken that decision?
Well, we're a much younger firm than some of those other places. I mean, General Catalyst has been around for 16, 17 years, have grown a lot, by many metrics, people, portfolio, assets under management. And I wouldn't rule any of that stuff out in the future, but I do think that, we have a culture of, again, working very closely with the companies that we invest in, really sort of understanding the local environment super, super well. And we just candidly feel like we have a lot of room to grow still domestically. And, if we feel like that's getting capped at all and the marginal value of a person is higher somewhere else and we feel like we can unlock value elsewhere, we would consider that. But it's sort of a question of what your opportunity set is.
I mean, one consideration to that, though, is that, depending specifically on the type of fund that you talk about, even if it's an American, whatever industry name from the Valley, the setup of their fund in, say, Europe or in Asia have very different constitutions of limited partners. So, again, not to say that's good or bad. I think there's the local effect that, you focus on a geography and you get really good results because you can dig really deep. But equally, I think, and this kind of may be a component of how much more offline component there is to a company versus just pure software, because pure software, you maybe think about distribution, but you don't have to deliver something in, Jakarta or Tokyo, right? Like that's not in your mind, where that delivery component is very local. And then hence you want to have that tie up, especially when we see, the whether it's on demand or the kind of offline and online world converging as a service, it's something that I think we think about a lot, and as a function of that, we've tried to, although we have some globality to our firm, if that's even a word, that part of it is really to help our companies grow, and the relationships with other funds. So I think there's maybe a little bit of the technicality is really important when thinking about brands in other countries.
And Indonesia is a good example, a huge population, so even something that's local to Indonesia has a lot of potential. As you think about potential investments that have the potential to go global versus those that are purely local, how do you weigh that up?
Well, internationalizing businesses is a really, really hard thing to do. And I guess the majority of firms that are trying to do that actually fail in a lot of instances where they do try. So even within Europe, it's not a European investment that you do. Usually you're focused on one market and then look at it market by market. And there are so many things that he can do wrong. Now, it's different for pure tech, no question, but as soon as you start delivering stuff, as soon as you have a content element to your business system, and culture really plays a vital role in what you do, internationalizing businesses is a really, really hard thing to do. So at the end of the day, you always have to look at, are the companies building a moat in the country from which they actually originate? Do they make a lot of money there? And will they then take elements of their business system that they can really take abroad? And I would say we're seeing more failures there than we're seeing successes.
Yeah, I mean, I also think there's sort of a dynamic of, are you building sort of foundational infrastructure, sort of breakthrough technology and a real platform? Are you building sort of a network that is fully digital, or are you doing something that caters to the tastes of local population and has a lot of sort of offline components, as Hiro mentioned? And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but the thing that Silicon Valley still, for the most part, has a lock on is sort of these foundational platform technologies. We see Magic Leap coming out of Florida. Maybe that'll shake things up a little bit, but for the most part, if you're building something in drones, you're building something in AR, VR, you're building something in autonomous vehicles, you're building something in the smart home, all these things, if it's not being done by a major platform company, which is likely based in Silicon Valley, it's being sort of done with local entrepreneurs there, and that has not. Those platforms have tended, with maybe the exception of Asia, to become global platforms.
I think that's a very good point, because those are the ones that become huge. I think we take a view that there's no reason why that can't happen, say in Europe. Say Unity is probably a good example, right?
Sure.
That's, kind of Scandinavian name, from Denmark, obviously kind of moved to San Francisco, but a game platform that is, a platform. So I think the possibility is there. We surely, think that depending on and it's probably, I think you're right, because it's somewhat category specific. Some categories can be big enough, say in Germany, where, if you look for the German winner, it can still be $1 billion outcome. So, I think you have to be somewhat, particular in how you think about it. But of course, for a fund like us, we're super psyched, super excited about companies that are trying to go global. So we spend a lot of time trying to think about whether that can happen or not. But the possibility, I think, is there.
Martin said it's very hard to take a company global. So when you look at your investments, and how do you avoid the pitfalls? What are the pitfalls there when you're looking at a company and asking yourself whether it can do that?
I think there's a few things. I mean, having been a participant and potentially part of the problem in certain instances, as an investor, not always having the right answers, that can be a problem. But I do think that you need to establish proper product market fit within what you're doing, and then as a basis of your product or service. If you go too early, I think that can cause a problem. And the two things that are finite are capital and time for a high growth company. I mean, obviously there's resources in terms of human capital as well, but it's to try to dissuade companies. I think it's more or less prioritization, maybe. At least that's how I think about it, and not to take on too much, but to effectively push in the right way, where you're pushing the boundaries, but it's not destroying real value at the core.
Okay.
We also, the capital markets and technology markets go through cycles, and we are past the 2014 kind of go gaga, days where people were just kind of like handing out checks like the sandwich guys with the stand on the street corner. Like we're not doing that anymore. Hopefully we didn't do too much of it. But the result of that was people expanding before they had product market fit. The result of that was people thinking that the premium to being number one globally was going to be so high that any sort of sloppiness around the way you could sort of power through. And most of our companies, honestly, at the boardroom, we're telling to slow down, not speed up, because we want to get it right.
I think what Spencer's saying is absolutely right. It does go in cycles, and it has to do, I think, very much also with the availability of venture capital. I mean, there was a lot of capital going into companies that, I guess a lot of venture capital was funding foolish things, where internationalization was pushed, even though the product wasn't quite ready. The team wasn't experienced in doing it. Prices skyrocket now. I think there's a much better sense of realism in the market now that we saw 2 years ago, that we saw 3 years ago. I think Southeast Asia still is a bit frothy there, where teams who don't have a complete product want to basically invest in the entire region and roll out the product in the entire region. But I think Europe's become very realistic, and also what we see here in the U.S. when we do investments here, a very high sense of realism.
I feel like probably a common theme amongst that we can all share is like ride sharing, Uber. If you look at the world, whether it's Didi in China, Grab in Southeast Asia, Gojek in Indonesia, Kareem in the Middle East, these are all kind of substantial. Cabify, Latin America. I mean, these are all MyTaxi. These are all alternatives and very localized models that are not necessarily, yielding to the kind of, both capital, the fundraising capabilities and execution capabilities of Uber. So again, I think, there's a lot of potential for local businesses, even in that global kind of category, where you hear a lot about companies like Uber, but there's all these local companies that are really Ola in India. There's tons of them. So that, I think, is something to kind of reflect on and think about. And I think we all do that when we're investing into things. But I do agree with Martin. The U.S., I mean, just by sheer volume of venture capital raised, what is it, like 30 billion or so on kind of whatever metric you take. I mean, Europe is what, like 6 or 7 maybe? Yeah. So the availability of capital is kind of has affected the psyche of the entrepreneur too.
And also there's a lot of history there. And this is one of the reasons why we still love investing in the US, because you just have so many more grown-ups here, right? You have in Europe, you still find a lot of very young teams, very inexperienced teams, and here in the US, the availability, the quality of the management teams, the quality of experience is just so much higher, and we really notice that. We really notice that difference.
100%. I go back to Spencer's point. It's highly competitive as well. So to carve, I mean, we're based in London. We have at least some sort of ambition to be, although European-centric, global. It's United States is a tough market, and I think we're trying to really hone our identity to say, to be able to say in less than 10 seconds what we are, and it's required.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a funny thing for us. I mean, we have now 4 offices in the United States, 2 in the Valley, so one is in San Francisco, one's in Palo Alto. I'm a couple blocks away here in Soho. We've got a really great place, and we have a place in Boston. And, we're fighting the local fight in every place. So it's not, so we're trying to establish brand, sort of recognition, brand authority, and substantive brand authority in each of those areas. And so, that's a part of how you win in a competitive world is we're not like hiding out in Palo Alto and kind of flying in every once in a while to New York. We are here, we are present, we are investing $100 million a year in New York companies, that's a big part of how we do it.
So that brings me to a question I wanted to ask about, and you kind of hinted at it earlier, the segmentation of VC as well, by stage, by the types of company they invest in. You mentioned VCs that would only invest in minority-run companies, for example. How is that playing out? How is that changing in terms of the segmentation of VC and having to focus on one specific area as opposed to trying to do lots of things?
Well, maybe if I start on this one. Well, for us, we have a heritage in consumer. We have a heritage in media. So that is, of course, one of the areas from where we start. And there's fantastic investments to be done in areas outside. It's just that we know absolutely nothing about it. So we are very, very narrowly focused on 3 business models. We look at marketplaces, we look at digital networks, and we look at content-driven commerce, the stuff that Amazon will find very hard to do. Now, the rest they're going to eat up anyway. So these 3 things, that's what we do. And we don't fray away from that. And we think that focus on industry and focus on business model for us is absolutely critical, is absolutely key. While in terms of area, we actually pretty much go global.
Martin, how many investors do you have on your team?
We now have a team of, 10, 11 investment professionals.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
For us, I think we look for the confluence of a few things, but namely, the active use of enabling technologies, whether it's, AI or whether it's, machine learning or vision technology or whatever, that combined with the business model element, and of course the kind of disruptability of an existing kind of ecosystem. I mean, those 3 things, although very basic, are the things that I think we weigh. Obviously, our heritage is also very consumer-oriented, but we have people on our investment team who are very good at software and enterprise, and so that's obviously a part of what we do. But again, I think it goes back to the basics of what are the driving technology? What does it make you more efficient, or how's it making it better? I think that we try to think about that a bit.
Yeah. So for us, one of the great benefits of sort of becoming a larger firm is that we can have, actually, somewhat like Hero, we can have multiple strategies. We can be investing in sort of the most bubblegummy of consumer stuff like Snapchat, which we're really pleased to be involved with in an early stage, to really, really geeky infrastructure software. And we like to get involved in that kind of primordial soup of the company. We like to get involved when, it's only opportunity and talent and hopefully capital from us. But we really, the common language we have is information technologies at the core, and try to be relatively stage focused, and benefit from the diversity of perspectives that our firm of our size can afford us. And that's something it's really hard to do when you're 2 or 3 people. When you're 2 or 3 people, you have to focus because you can't do so many things. For us, we very much sort of leverage each other's differences.
Yeah, Matt, the specialization piece, I think maybe if you look at the Valley, there's a lot more of that's happened because of just the nature of the ecosystem and the history, as Martin has pointed out. I think it's very robust, and in a competitive market, you have to really focus. You have people who are focused on fintech or just consumer and stages and whatnot. But for me, I think when we operate, or when I think about the world, there's certain things that you won't know. So bringing Martin in, because he's a corporate venture capital firm, he may have a lot of expertise in a certain area. Those are the things that I think may happen more and more, where you collaborate with other investors who have that industry or sector expertise to make sure that your investment, flourishes more. I mean, I think about that not just from a vertical specialization, but also a geo specialization, given what I said before about the dependence with maybe angel investors or early stage investors to help us do a better job.
Okay, and just to wrap up, the title is The World is Changing, Where's the Money? Can I just ask each of you to try and answer? It's a big question, where's the money? When you see that question, where did your mind take you?
Well, I think the money for us, as a late stage investor, is very much in actually making stuff work, bringing to bear the knowledge, the know-how, the experience that we have in the portfolio of companies that we've invested in, the portfolio of companies that we actually run as Hubert Burda Media, and using that knowledge and that know-how to help companies grow. And we believe by being an active investor in that area, we can really help and create some good returns.
I mean, we just raised the fund, so I'd like to think that we have money to give to people. But beyond that, when you ask me that question, if you think about it, it's like, it's really hard also to make returns. And so, where's the money? We'd like to believe, and we pursue that, rigorously, is that maybe there's a lot of opportunity to make money as an investor outside of the Valley. And we're strong believers of that. So that's where I think the money might be.
Okay. I'm glad that you both touched on returns as the answer to the question, where's the money? Look, I think for us, the money is in the future. And I think that's obviously a very basic answer, but just to unpack it, I think it's easy to get trapped into focusing on businesses today that are sort of have near-term momentum, that have a lot of parallels to things that have worked in the past and are sort of obvious. And oftentimes, where there's the most opportunity and the most profit, return for our LPs, is doing things that are not obvious. So every year, somebody in our firm is going on sort of a learning expedition to try to map out a new space. Each individual, not the whole firm. So I mean, if you think about what that brings to the table in terms of really trying to understand where things are going, that's where we think the real opportunity is. So.
Okay, thank you. That's all we have time for. So thank you to the panelists. Thank you for listening.